The A-10 Thunderbolt II emerged from the smoke like a ghost materializing from hell itself. Black scorch marks streaked across its titanium bathtub cockpit, hydraulic fluid hemorrhaging from severed lines, yet the twin General Electric turbofans still screamed their defiant song. Control Tower 7 went silent. Radar operators froze mid-sentence. The aircraft that Colonel Marcus Reed had personally grounded 3 months ago was somehow airborne, somehow functional, somehow returning from a mission that officially never existed. Ghost Rider 7, this is Tower. State your condition. The radio crackled with barely contained panic. No response. The A-10 banked left with mechanical precision, landing gear deploying despite visible damage to the hydraulic systems. Someone was flying that aircraft with skills that transcended normal pilot training. The kind of skills that came from muscle memory forged in combat zones where mistakes meant body bags. Reed stormed across the tarmac, his polished boots slapping concrete as maintenance crews scattered. He'd buried Kasia Ghost, Volkov's career personally. Her psychological evaluation after the incident in Syria had been damning, exhibits dangerous disregard for command structure and mission parameters. The official report stated pilot error, equipment malfunction, and insubordination. What it didn't mention was the 37 civilians she'd pulled from an ambush zone, while her wingman radioed for her to abort. The A-10 touched down with surprising gentleness for a half-destroyed aircraft. Kasia had always possessed an almost supernatural connection to machinery, an intuitive understanding of how metal and electronics responded under pressure. Her father, a Russian immigrant mechanic, had taught her that aircraft weren't just machines. They were extensions of the pilot's will, partners in an aerial dance where trust meant survival. The canopy opened with a hydraulic hiss. Steam rose from the cockpit like incense from some mechanical altar. Reed expected to see Kasia emerge broken, perhaps injured, definitely court-martial bound. Instead, she climbed out with methodical calm, her flight suit torn but her posture erect. Those steel-gray eyes that had earned her the call sign, Ghost, fixed on Reed with unwavering intensity. "Colonel," she said, removing her helmet to reveal auburn hair matted with sweat, "I believe we need to discuss the situation developing 12 clicks northeast." Reed's jaw clenched. "Captain Volkov, you are in direct violation of." 36 American civilians are trapped in a collapsed mining facility, she interrupted. Local search and rescue estimates 6 hours until structural failure. Weather window closes in 4. I've already run preliminary reconnaissance. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Behind Kasia, the damaged A-10 ticked and groaned as superheated metal slowly cooled. The aircraft bore wounds that should have been fatal, yet somehow this ghost pilot had coaxed it home. Reed stared at the scorch marks, the twisted metal, the hydraulic fluid pooling on concrete, and felt something cold settle in his stomach. "How?" he whispered. Kasia's expression remained unreadable. "Sometimes the aircraft tells you what it needs, sir. Sometimes it tells you what the mission demands." The emergency klaxon began wailing across the base. Reed's radio crackled to life with reports of the mining disaster. As he listened, he realized that somehow, impossibly, Kasia had known before anyone else. She'd been in the air before the official distress call was even transmitted. "Ghost," Reed said quietly, using her call sign for the first time in months, "tell me everything." But as he looked into those haunted eyes, he wondered if he really wanted to know the answer. Captain Kasia Volkov had grown up in the shadow of defunct Soviet aircraft. Her childhood playground a boneyard of MiG-21s and Sukhoi fighters that her father salvaged for scrap metal. Dmitry Volkov had fled Moscow in 1987, carrying nothing but mechanical expertise and a daughter who could identify aircraft engines by sound alone. He'd taught her that machines possessed souls, not in any mystical sense, but in the accumulated wisdom of engineering decisions, the metal memory of stress and strain, the way components learn to work together under impossible conditions. At 12, Kasia could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. At 16, she was teaching Air Force ROTC cadets about hydraulic systems. At 22, she became the youngest woman to qualify for A-10 combat operations, her training scores so exceptional that instructors initially suspected data entry errors. But there were no errors. Kasia simply understood aircraft the way others understood language, instinctively, completely, with an intimacy that bordered on telepathic. The psychological evaluators never understood this connection. They saw her unorthodox flying techniques as reckless rather than intuitive. When she pulled high-G maneuvers that should have stressed airframes beyond tolerance, they called it equipment abuse. When she coaxed damaged aircraft through impossible scenarios, they labeled it luck. The brass preferred pilots who followed procedures, not those who rewrote them mid-flight. Syria had changed everything. Her squadron was providing close air support for a Marine extraction when insurgents ambushed a refugee convoy. Standard operating procedure demanded maintaining altitude and waiting for ground controller authorization. Kasia watched through her targeting pod as children scattered under automatic weapons fire, their parents falling in clouds of dust and cordite. Ghost Rider 7 maintained position. Do not engage without authorization, her flight leader had commanded. But Kasia saw something the others missed. The convoy wasn't random civilians. It was an organized evacuation of American contractors and their families, caught in the wrong place at the worst possible moment. The targeting signatures were clear. Non-combatants moving in a defensive pattern, adults shielding children, improvised medical stations where the wounded were being treated. Negative, Ghost Rider lead. I have visual on American nationals under direct fire, initiating close air support. Ghost Rider 7, you are not authorized to engage. Return to holding pattern immediately. Kasia's response had been to dive her A-10 into a gun run that violated 3 separate engagement protocols. Her 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon spoke in bursts of controlled fury, each shot precisely calculated to neutralize threats without harming civilians. She made 7 passes, each one bringing her closer to the ground, each one drawing insurgent fire away from the evacuation. The official report stated that she destroyed 2 technical vehicles and forced insurgent withdrawal, enabling successful civilian evacuation. What it didn't mention was the bullet hole in her canopy, 6 inches from her helmet, or the fact that she'd flown the damaged aircraft home on one engine and backup hydraulics, or that 37 people owed their lives to her decision to disobey direct orders. The court-martial recommendation had been quietly withdrawn after the State Department confirmed the civilian casualties she'd prevented, but Colonel Reed had made his position clear. Captain Volkov was too unpredictable for operational deployment. Her psychological profile indicated insufficient regard for chain of command authority. She was grounded pending reassignment to training duties. That was 3 months ago. 3 months of watching other pilots fly missions she should have been leading. 3 months of teaching basic maneuvers to lieutenants fresh from flight school. 3 months of feeling like her wings had been surgically removed. Now she stood on the tarmac, still wearing a flight suit that smelled of hydraulic fluid and cordite, facing the man who tried to end her career. The damaged A-10 behind her told its own story of impossible flying, of mechanical systems pushed beyond design limitations, and somehow responding with loyalty rather than failure. The mining facility collapsed at 13:47 hours, Kasia said, consulting notes written on her flight suit sleeve. Seismic sensors registered secondary failures throughout the underground structure. Local emergency services lacked the equipment for deep extraction. Weather front moving in from the northwest will ground all aircraft by 1800 hours. Reed studied her face, searching for signs of the reckless pilot he'd portrayed in official reports. Instead, he saw calculated precision, the same methodical approach that had made her a legend among maintenance crews. Kasia didn't take unnecessary risks. She simply understood which risks were actually necessary. How did you know about the collapse before official notifications? I monitor emergency frequencies during maintenance flights, she replied. The required systems testing after hydraulic repairs. When the distress call came through, I was already airborne with full ordnance load. Maintenance flights don't carry ordnance, Captain. This one did, sir. The mining facility is 12 clicks from a suspected insurgent supply route. I determined that armed reconnaissance was prudent given current intelligence assessments. Reed almost smiled despite himself. Even grounded, Kasia found ways to prepare for missions that didn't officially exist. She'd been monitoring rescue frequencies, maintaining combat readiness, positioning herself to respond to emergencies that command structure couldn't predict. It was vintage Ghost, always 3 steps ahead, always ready for the unexpected. "Show me the reconnaissance footage," Reed said. Kasia extracted a data card from her helmet's recording system. The footage revealed a scene of controlled devastation. Mining tunnels collapsed in a pattern suggesting structural failure rather than explosive damage. Thermal imaging showed dozens of heat signatures trapped in air pockets throughout the underground complex. Ground-penetrating radar indicated that conventional excavation would take days they didn't have. But the A-10's sensor suite had detected something rescue teams missed. A secondary access tunnel, partially collapsed but potentially navigable for specialized equipment. The thermal signatures clustered near this tunnel weren't random, they were organized, suggesting that survivors had found each other and were attempting self-rescue. The trapped personnel have established communication with surface teams, Kasia explained. They've reported structural instability throughout the main complex. The secondary tunnel represents their best evacuation route, but it requires precise excavation to avoid triggering additional collapses. Reed studied the imagery with growing understanding. This wasn't a simple search and rescue operation. It was a complex engineering challenge that required surgical precision, real-time assessment of underground conditions, and the ability to adapt rapidly as the situation evolved. The kind of mission where rigid adherence to protocol could mean the difference between rescue and body recovery. "What's your assessment, Captain?" Kasia's expression remained professional, but Reed caught a glimpse of something deeper. The same intensity she'd shown before Syria, when she still believed the Air Force valued results over regulations. "Conventional excavation equipment is too heavy for the compromised tunnel structure," she said. "We need precision ordnance to clear specific debris patterns without destabilizing the remaining supports. Close air support coordinated with ground engineering teams. Real-time assessment of structural integrity as the operation progresses." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of hard experience. "Sir, this is exactly the kind of mission the A-10 was designed for. Close support, precision engagement, extended loiter time in contested airspace. We have the capability to save those people, but only if we act within the next 3 hours." Reed looked again at the damaged aircraft behind her. The A-10 that should have been unflyable, piloted by the captain he'd grounded for being too independent, returning from a reconnaissance mission that proved her instincts were still sharper than anyone else's. The irony wasn't lost on him. The emergency frequency crackled in his radio. "Tower 7, this is Rescue Command. We're showing 36 trapped personnel with approximately 4 hours until critical structural failure, requesting immediate air support for precision excavation operations." Reed keyed his radio. "Rescue Command, stand by." He looked at Kasia, seeing not the insubordinate pilot from his reports, but the officer who'd saved 37 civilians by refusing to follow orders that would have gotten them killed. "Ghost," he said quietly, "how long to get that A-10 back in operational condition?" "Sir, she's operational now. The damage is superficial, hydraulic leaks, minor structural stress, avionics functioning within parameters. I can have her refueled and rearmed in 20 minutes. And the psychological evaluation, the recommendation against operational deployment. Kasha met his gaze without flinching. Colonel, with respect, psychological evaluations don't save lives trapped underground. Aircraft do, pilots do, the mission does. The klaxon wailed again across the base. Emergency vehicles raced toward the flight line. Reed watched the controlled chaos of a rescue operation mobilizing and realized that every minute of bureaucratic delay meant another minute closer to 36 body bags. "Captain Volkov," he said formally, "you are hereby reinstated to active flight status pending completion of emergency rescue operations. Get that bird ready." Kasha snapped to attention, but not before Reed caught the brief smile that transformed her usually stoic expression. It was the smile of a pilot who'd just been given back her wings. "Yes, sir, thank you, sir." As she turned toward her aircraft, Reed called after her, "Ghost, bring them home." "Always do, sir." But as Reed watched her disappear into the pre-flight preparations, he wondered if he just made the best decision of his career or signed his own court-martial papers. With Kasha Volkov, it was often impossible to tell the difference. 22 minutes later, Ghost Rider 7 lifted off into afternoon sky painted the color of old brass. The A-10's twin engines howled their familiar song as Kasha banked northwest toward the mining facility, her aircraft loaded with precision-guided munitions, and hope measured in the lives of 36 strangers she'd never met. The radio chatter was clinical, professional, devoid of the emotion that Reed knew was burning behind those steel-gray eyes. But he'd seen something else in Kasha's expression during their brief exchange. Not just the confidence of a skilled pilot, but the recognition of someone who'd finally been given a mission worthy of her abilities. "Rescue Command, this is Ghost Rider 7, Kasha's voice came through the radio with characteristic calm. "On station in 15 minutes. Request updated thermal imagery and ground team positions." "Ghost Rider 7, Rescue Command. Thermal shows heat signatures in Sector 4, approximately 40 feet below surface. Ground teams positioned for coordinated excavation. Weather window closing faster than anticipated. Estimate 2 hours before conditions become unflyable." "Copy, Rescue Command. Beginning reconnaissance pass now." Reed monitored the radio traffic from Tower 7, watching radar tracks as Kasha's aircraft circled the disaster site. Her approach was methodical, professional, exactly what emergency protocols demanded. But Reed knew Ghost well enough to recognize the subtle signs of preparation for something beyond standard operating procedure. "Ghost Rider 7, what's your assessment?" "Rescue Command, the secondary tunnel structure is more compromised than initial imagery indicated. Conventional excavation will trigger additional collapses. Recommend precision ordnance to create controlled access points while ground teams establish structural supports." There was a pause before Rescue Command responded. "Ghost Rider 7, we're not authorized for explosive excavation in proximity to civilian personnel." Reed grabbed his radio. "Rescue Command, Tower 7. Captain Volkov is authorized to use any means necessary to facilitate rescue operations. Ground teams will coordinate through her assessment." "Tower 7, acknowledged. Ghost Rider 7, you have operational control of rescue coordination." Reed had just handed Kasha exactly what she'd needed in Syria: complete tactical authority with no bureaucratic constraints. The kind of mission parameters that allowed exceptional pilots to do exceptional things. The kind of trust that military hierarchy rarely extended to officers with psychological evaluation concerns. But as he watched her aircraft disappear beyond the horizon, Reed realized he wasn't concerned about Kasha following regulations. He was concerned about the 36 people whose lives now depended on her ability to transcend them. The mining facility stretched across 3 square miles of desert scrub, its surface installations scattered around the main shaft like mechanical flowers blooming from underground roots. From 2,000 feet, Kasia could see the extent of the disaster: concrete structures cracked and tilted, support equipment scattered by secondary collapses, emergency vehicles arranged in hasty perimeters around the primary excavation sites. Her A-10 sensors painted a detailed picture of the underground structure. The mining complex descended nearly 200 feet through layered geological formations, a maze of primary tunnels, secondary shafts, and equipment bays that had become a three-dimensional puzzle of death traps and potential rescue routes. Rescue Command, Ghost Rider 7. I'm seeing heat signatures in 4 primary locations. Sectors 2 and 4 show organized movement. Survivors are mobile and attempting self-rescue. Sectors 1 and 6 show stationary signatures that may indicate injured personnel. Copy, Ghost Rider 7. Ground-penetrating radar confirms your assessment. Sector 4 survivors have established communication. They report structural damage blocking all primary exit routes. Kasia banked her aircraft into a lower-altitude reconnaissance pass, studying the thermal patterns with the intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. The trapped personnel weren't randomly distributed. They'd gathered in areas with the most structural integrity, organized themselves into groups that could provide mutual support, positioned themselves near potential rescue routes. These weren't panicked civilians waiting for rescue. They were experienced miners who understood their environment, making rational decisions based on professional knowledge of underground safety protocols. The kind of people who might survive if given the chance, but who would die if rescue efforts proceeded too slowly or with too much caution. Rescue Command, what's the composition of trapped personnel? Ghost Rider 7, we have 36 mine workers, including 4 with emergency medical training and 2 structural engineers. They've established communication protocols and are reporting conditions in real time. Professional miners. Kasia felt the familiar surge of respect for people who work dangerous jobs with quiet competence. Like pilots, miners understood that survival often depended on making correct decisions under pressure, trusting expertise over emotion, accepting calculated risks to avoid certain death. Rescue Command, patch me through to underground communications. Static crackled as the radio operators established the connection. Then a voice emerged from the electronic chaos, calm, authoritative, with the measured cadence of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. Surface, this is Foreman Martinez underground. We have 36 personnel in 4 groups, 8 injured but stable. Primary exits are blocked by debris too heavy for manual removal. Secondary tunnel in Sector 4 shows partial structural integrity. Kasia keyed her radio. Foreman Martinez, this is Ghost Rider 7, Air Force Close Air Support. I'm going to help get you out of there. What's your assessment of structural stability for precision excavation? Ghost Rider 7, Martinez. The Sector 4 tunnel can handle controlled access if we support the remaining pillars during excavation. We've identified 12 critical support points that need reinforcement before any debris removal begins. Understood, Martinez. Stand by. Kasia switched back to Rescue Command frequency. Rescue Command, we need structural engineers and precision excavation equipment positioned at Sector 4. I can provide ordnance support for debris removal, but ground teams need to establish tunnel supports first. Ghost Rider 7, structural teams are mobilizing now. What's your ordnance requirements? Kasia studied her weapons display. The A-10 carried a mixed load: AGM-65 Maverick missiles for heavy debris, small-diameter bombs for precision work, and her 30mm cannon for surgical removal of specific obstacles. More than enough firepower to excavate a rescue tunnel, provided she could deliver it with the precision of a construction tool rather than a weapons system. Rescue Command, I'll need real-time communication with underground personnel during all ordnance delivery. Any structural changes need immediate reporting to prevent cascading failures. Copy Ghost Rider 7. Communication established. Foreman Martinez will coordinate with ground structural teams. As Kasia climbed back to operational altitude, she felt the familiar sensation of mission focus narrowing her awareness to essential elements: aircraft performance, target analysis, communication protocols, and the lives depending on her precision. The psychological evaluation that had questioned her decision-making hadn't understood this state of professional clarity, the way combat pilots could process multiple variables simultaneously while maintaining calm execution under pressure. But Colonel Reed understood it now. He was listening to the radio traffic, hearing the methodical professionalism in her voice as she coordinated with ground teams, the careful questions about structural integrity, the systematic approach to a rescue operation that required both military precision and engineering expertise. Tower 7, Ghost Rider 7, beginning first precision pass. Ground teams confirm structural supports in position. Ghost Rider 7 structural teams report ready. You are cleared hot. Kasia rolled her A-10 into the attack run with mechanical precision, but her heart was beating with the rhythm of 36 lives, counting on her ability to use weapons designed for destruction as tools of salvation. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same aircraft that had been declared too dangerous for her to fly was now the only thing standing between 36 people and a slow death underground. The first Maverick missile struck with surgical precision, removing a concrete slab that blocked access to the secondary tunnel without disturbing the supporting structures. Underground, Foreman Martinez reported minimal structural damage and clear access to the first rescue zone. Beautiful shot, Ghost Rider 7. Debris is cleared and tunnel integrity is holding. We're beginning evacuation of Sector 2 personnel. Copy Martinez, moving to Sector 4 for the next excavation point. But as Kasia lined up for the second attack run, her radar warning receiver began chirping. Weather front was moving faster than predicted, bringing turbulence that would make precision bombing increasingly dangerous. The window for rescue operations was closing with each passing minute. She looked at her fuel gauge, calculated time remaining on station, and made the mental adjustments that separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. The mission wasn't just about following the plan anymore. It was about adapting to changing conditions while maintaining the precision necessary to save lives rather than accidentally taking them. Rescue command, weather deteriorating ahead of schedule. I need to accelerate the timeline. Ghost Rider 7 understood. What's your assessment? Kasia studied the sensor displays showing underground heat signatures. The trapped personnel were spread across 4 locations, but 2 groups had already reached secure areas where they could wait for conventional evacuation. The critical groups remained in sectors 4 and 6, locations where structural damage was increasing and time was running out. I can complete excavation for the 2 critical groups, but I need ground teams ready for immediate evacuation. No margin for delays once the tunnels are opened. Copy Ghost Rider 7. All rescue teams are positioned and ready. The second Maverick strike opened access to Sector 4 with the same precision as the first. But as Kasia banked toward Sector 6, Foreman Martinez's voice carried a new note of urgency. Ghost Rider 7, Martinez. Sector 6 is showing structural instability. The remaining personnel are in immediate danger of secondary collapse. Kasia switched her targeting system to the small-diameter bombs, weapons designed for precision engagement in complex environments. The Sector 6 excavation would require removing debris while simultaneously reinforcing weakened support structures, a task that demanded perfect timing and absolute accuracy. Martinez, I need exact coordinates for the remaining support pillars. Any miscalculation could bring down the entire section. Ghost Rider 7, coordinates transmitted. But be advised, we're seeing stress fractures developing in real time. The remaining structure may not hold much longer. Kasha felt the familiar calmness that came with absolute focus. This was what she'd been trained for, what all the years of preparation had led to. The moment when pilot skill, aircraft capability, and mission requirements converged into something that transcended normal operational parameters. She rolled into the attack run knowing that the next 60 seconds would determine whether 6 people lived or died. The kind of pressure that revealed whether all the training, all the experience, all the psychological evaluations had accurately measured what mattered most. The ability to perform perfectly when perfection was the only acceptable standard. The small diameter bomb released from her aircraft with a whisper rather than a roar. Kasha watched through her targeting pod as the weapon descended toward coordinates that represented not just target points but human lives depending on her precision. In the final seconds before impact, she found herself holding her breath, not from tension, but from the strange serenity that came with knowing she'd done everything possible to bring those people home. The explosion was perfectly contained, removing debris while leaving support structures intact. For a moment, silence filled the radio frequencies. Then Foreman Martinez's voice came through, carrying relief and professional respect in equal measure. Outstanding work, Ghost Rider 7. Access is clear and structural integrity is holding. Beginning evacuation now. Copy, Martinez, standing by for confirmation of personnel recovery. But as Kasha maintained overwatch of the rescue operation, she felt the aircraft shudder in the increasing turbulence. The weather front had arrived ahead of schedule, bringing winds that made precision flying increasingly difficult. Her fuel gauge showed reserves dropping faster than anticipated due to the extended low-altitude operations. Rescue Command, Ghost Rider 7. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. What's the status of personnel evacuation? Ghost Rider 7, we have 24 personnel safely recovered. 12 remain in final evacuation from Sectors 4 and 6. Estimated time to completion, 15 minutes. Kasha calculated fuel consumption, weather conditions, and operational safety margins. Under normal circumstances, prudent decision-making would require immediate return to base before conditions became dangerous. But these weren't normal circumstances, and the 12 people still underground represented the difference between mission success and partial failure. Rescue Command, I can maintain overwatch for 20 more minutes, then I'll need to depart regardless of evacuation status. Copy, Ghost Rider 7. Ground teams are expediting recovery operations. As she circled the rescue site, Kasha thought about the psychological evaluation that had questioned her judgment. The evaluators had focused on her tendency to exceed authorized parameters, to make independent decisions based on situational assessment rather than regulatory compliance. They'd interpreted this as a character flaw rather than recognizing it as the defining characteristic of pilots who could function effectively in complex, dynamic environments. But Colonel Reed understood the difference now. He was monitoring her radio communications, listening to the measured professionalism in her voice as she managed fuel consumption, weather conditions, and rescue coordination simultaneously. This wasn't reckless flying. It was exceptional piloting applied to circumstances that demanded exceptions. Ghost Rider 7, Rescue Command. All personnel successfully recovered. 36 souls accounted for and en route to medical facilities. The relief in Kasha's voice was audible despite her professional composure. Outstanding, Rescue Command. Ghost Rider 7 departing the area. But as she turned toward home, struggling to maintain controlled flight in increasingly violent turbulence, Kasha realized the mission wasn't over yet. The damaged A-10 that had barely made the flight to the rescue site now had to navigate deteriorating weather conditions with compromised systems and critically low fuel reserves. The aircraft that had been declared too dangerous for her to fly was about to prove whether the psychological evaluators or the mission results provided a more accurate measure of professional competence. In the next 30 minutes, either Kasia would demonstrate that exceptional pilots could transcend bureaucratic limitations, or the evaluation reports would be validated by her failure to bring herself and her aircraft home safely. The weather front hit with the fury of nature asserting dominance over human ambition. Wind shear turbulence hammered Kasia's A-10 like invisible fists, each gust threatening to exceed the aircraft's structural limits. Rain sheeted across her canopy with such intensity that visual navigation became impossible, forcing her to rely entirely on instruments that flickered and fluctuated with each lightning strike. The hydraulic system that had been damaged during the morning's reconnaissance flight was failing more rapidly under the stress of turbulent flight. Primary hydraulic pressure dropped to minimum operational levels, then continued declining despite her attempts to isolate the leak. The backup systems engaged automatically, but Kasia knew they wouldn't last long enough to reach base if the primary system failed completely. Tower 7, Ghost Rider 7, declaring emergency due to hydraulic failure and severe weather conditions. Request immediate vector to closest suitable airfield. Ghost Rider 7, Tower 7, emergency declared and acknowledged. Vector 270 to Palmdale Municipal, distance 43 miles. Be advised, conditions there are marginal but improving. 43 miles might as well have been 400 with failing hydraulic systems in severe turbulence. Kasia felt the controls becoming increasingly unresponsive as hydraulic pressure continued dropping. The A-10 was designed to survive combat damage, but even the Thunderbolt's legendary toughness had limits when multiple systems failed simultaneously. Tower 7, hydraulic pressure is critical. I may need to attempt landing at a closer facility. Colonel Reed's voice came through the radio with uncharacteristic emotion. Ghost, there's a small airstrip at 29 Palms, bearing 265, distance 22 miles. Runway is short but adequate for emergency landing. Reed was offering her options, treating her as the experienced pilot she was rather than the problematic officer from her evaluation reports. For the first time in months, Kasia felt the respect that had once defined her relationship with command authority, the recognition that she possessed skills and judgment worth trusting when lives were at stake. Copy Tower 7, setting course for 29 Palms. But as she altered course toward the emergency airstrip, Kasia felt the flight controls stiffen further. The backup hydraulic system was failing faster than anticipated, probably due to additional damage sustained during the precision bombing runs. She was flying an aircraft that was transitioning from damage to unflyable with each passing minute. The psychological evaluation had questioned her tendency to continue missions beyond normal safety parameters. Now, she faced the practical application of that assessment, the choice between attempting a risky landing at a marginal airstrip or potentially losing the aircraft and her life while trying to reach a better facility. But this wasn't about risk assessment or regulatory compliance. It was about bringing home the aircraft that had saved 36 lives, landing safely the machine that had proven its worth despite bureaucratic attempts to ground both pilot and plane. Kasia felt the same determination that had driven her to disobey orders in Syria, not reckless disregard for consequences, but absolute commitment to mission completion. Tower 7, I'm showing complete hydraulic failure, switching to manual reversion mode. Manual reversion meant flying the A-10 using backup systems that provided minimal control authority. It was like trying to steer a truck using only emergency brakes, possible under ideal conditions, nearly impossible in severe weather with a damaged aircraft. The kind of flying that required experience, instinct, and the mechanical sympathy that came from years of understanding how aircraft responded under stress. Ghost, what's your fuel status? Reed's voice carried the concern of a commander who'd finally recognized what he was about to lose. "Fuel is critical but adequate for single approach," Kasia replied. "I'll get one chance at this landing." The admission hung in the radio silence like a prayer waiting for divine intervention. Everyone monitoring the frequency understood the implications. Either Kasia would demonstrate the exceptional piloting skills that had made her legendary among maintenance crews, or the psychological evaluation would be validated by the wreckage of her aircraft scattered across the desert. Through the storm-lashed canopy, Kasia caught glimpses of the 29 Palms airstrip, a narrow ribbon of concrete barely visible through sheets of rain and desert sand whipped into horizontal streams by hurricane-force winds. The runway looked impossibly short for an A-10 approach, especially one being flown with manual controls in conditions that challenged even fully functional aircraft. But as she lined up for final approach, Kasia felt the familiar sensation of absolute focus that transformed challenging flights into exercises in mechanical precision. The psychological evaluators had never understood this state of professional clarity, the way exceptional pilots could process multiple variables simultaneously while maintaining perfect execution under impossible pressure. The A-10 responded to her control inputs with the reluctant cooperation of a wounded animal that trusted its handler. Each adjustment required physical force as she muscled the aircraft through an approach that demanded perfection from both pilot and machine. The runway rushed toward her through the storm like a concrete lifeline, narrow and short, but representing the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. At 50 feet above the runway, a massive wind shear caught the A-10 and slammed it toward the ground with potentially fatal force. Lesser pilots would have attempted to abort the landing, but Kasia understood that her aircraft lacked the power and control authority for a successful go-around. This approach would end either in landing or impact. There were no other options. She used every technique learned through years of flying damaged aircraft, compensating for control system failures with throttle adjustments, using aerodynamic forces to supplement hydraulic systems, applying the kind of piloting skills that couldn't be taught in simulators or captured in evaluation reports. The A-10 touched down hard but straight, exactly on the runway centerline despite winds that should have made controlled flight impossible. The aircraft rolled to a stop just short of the runway's end, both engines still running, landing gear intact, pilot uninjured. Emergency vehicles raced across the rain-soaked concrete toward the A-10 that had completed another impossible mission under the control of the pilot who supposedly couldn't be trusted with operational responsibilities. As Kasia shut down the engines and opened the canopy, she looked back at the aircraft that had carried her through another day of proving that exceptional performance couldn't be measured by psychological evaluations or regulatory compliance reports. The A-10 bore new scars from its latest mission, additional hydraulic damage, stress fractures in control surfaces, electronic systems degraded by lightning strikes and extreme maneuvering. But it had brought home 36 lives, and one pilot who'd been declared too dangerous to fly. The rain had stopped by the time Colonel Reed arrived at 29 Palms in a base helicopter, the desert air cleared to crystalline transparency that made the mountains seem close enough to touch. Kasia was sitting on the wing of her A-10, still wearing the flight suit that bore stains from hydraulic fluid, cordite residue, and the sweat of flying damaged aircraft through impossible conditions. Reed approached slowly, studying the woman who just demonstrated why psychological evaluations sometimes failed to capture the qualities that mattered most in military aviation. She looked exhausted but unbroken, like a professional athlete who'd won a championship game through pure determination and exceptional skill application. "Ghost," he said quietly, "hell of a piece of flying." Kasia looked up from the maintenance checklist she'd been completing, her steel-gray eyes reflecting fatigue and something deeper, the satisfaction of someone who'd been given a mission worthy of her abilities and had exceeded every expectation while completing it. "Thank you, sir. The aircraft performed beautifully despite the damage. Maintenance crew did outstanding work preparing her for this mission. Even now, she deflected personal credit toward the team that supported her flying. Reed realized this was another aspect of her personality that the psychological evaluation had missed. The way exceptional pilots understood that individual performance was always built on collective effort, that successful missions required trust and cooperation rather than lone wolf heroics. Kasia, he said, using her given name for the first time since the Syria incident, I owe you an apology. The psychological evaluation, the grounding, the questions about your judgment, I was wrong.